Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you're all having a good Monday and a good start off to the week. I'm Caroline Cummings, the Executive Director of Oregon RAIN. Thank you for joining us today. We've got some great speakers lined up for you today. But before we move into that, I'm going to share my screen, and there's a few slides and intros that we want to talk about. So just so everybody knows they're in the right place. Today, as you know, we've been doing these every Monday at 2 o'clock. Today, we're really excited that we've got the managing directors and the team from Cascade Seed Fund with us. They're going to share some perspectives on how startups can weather the storm and everything that we're facing. So they've got some really good advice, or perspectives, I should say, not advice. And there'll be an opportunity for you guys to be posting questions as well as we go through that. So that's what today's session is about. And again, most of you know who I am, Executive Director of Oregon RAIN, as I mentioned earlier, and I also have the rest of my team on who you're going to meet in a minute. I want to remind everybody that the session today is being recorded, and we have been posting them to our social channels so that folks who can't make it can go back and listen in on them. But keep in mind that everything that is discussed on here will be posted live for anyone to watch. There's some virtual etiquette we wanted to quickly just go through. Please remain muted throughout the session. Unless you do have a question, raise your hand if you want to speak and ask that question, and then the team will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask that question. Or you can also post questions in the chat feature. I also want to remind people this is not a place to market your services, though we are mostly all entrepreneurs selling stuff. So, which is good, but if you have something that you want to sell or share and you think it would be beneficial to the Oregon RAIN network, please reach out to me or anybody on my team, and we'll work with you on how to promote your business. This really is meant to be a place for learning and inclusivity, so please keep that in mind throughout the session. And every Monday from 2 to 3, we're hosting these educational sessions. If you have any suggestions for topics, please post it in the chat or reach out to me. And then every Friday morning from 9 to 10 a.m., we're doing entrepreneur support group calls. Those have been really great. We also have different topics. We talk about unemployment. We talk about mental health, which the one this Friday is about mental health. We have a psychiatrist joining us talking about some tips on how to keep ourselves sane throughout this process. And family, you're welcome to bring family members to that session as well. Next Monday, we've got Dr. Rod Ray, who is the former CEO and president of Bend Research, and he's really respected in the startup community and the science community. He's going to be talking about how to maintain leadership in a time of crisis. So folks on my team, if you can post the link to that to register, that would be great. We hope to see you on that. And then the following Monday, if any of you are food manufacturers, food, even beverage manufacturers, I think it applies to both. We are really honored to have Seth Tibbett, who's the founder chairman of Tofurkey, which was actually started in a rural community in Oregon, on the team. He's grown the company now to estimated 40 million in sales. His stepson is now the CEO of the company, and he's going to be joining, Seth is going to be joining, talking about what Tofurkey is doing to sort of weather the storm, and really good information for other food manufacturers. So hopefully you can join us for that. Just a quick reminder of who we are. We're a nonprofit. We exist to help catalyze entrepreneurial ecosystems and support overlooked entrepreneurs and really build prosperous economies. And as a nonprofit, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the 20 cities and the 5 counties and the private foundations and the federal government and the private corporations who fund us. So we want to thank them. And today we are actually excited to feature Albany. We are honored to have Mayor Canopa with us just to take a few minutes to talk about what the city of Albany is doing to support its small businesses and entrepreneurs, and why the city of Albany is supportive of the work that we do. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mayor.
All right. Well, good afternoon. So I'm not used to doing speaking and off of my iPad, and where I'm usually in front of a whole bunch of people. So, but I'm Sharon Canopa, I'm Mayor of Albany. I have been first elected as mayor was back in 2008, and I was first elected to the Albany City Council as a city councilor in 1996. So, and I was budget committee before that. So a quarter of a century now, I've been involved in city government. I have seen the pendulum swinging back and forth when it comes to the economy, of a couple recessions having to be able to get through. And now it looks like this one is kind of a whopper of a recession that we are entering. And it's very hard to say how long it'll be before we can get out of this recession. But part of my background, though, before I ever got into city politics, is I did have a little startup business back when in my younger years for 14 years. I did wholesale manufacturing of gift wholesale. I sold to every state in the US, and that was back in a time before there was even email. Everything had to be done by by fax. There was no website then to be able to use, so you had to be really kind of creative to be able to market your product. That was sort of a different era of time than what we have today. It's a lot easier to be able to get into a business and market your product because of our World Wide Web. So with that, but I wanted to kind of let you know real quick what we've been doing with Albany. Our city council immediately knew that our local businesses were going to be needing some assistance. So we had to source a pot of funds out of our economic development fund that we set aside to help our small businesses, which was around $200,000, and it didn't take long, but all those funds were fully allocated. We do have our economic development staff that if you have any questions over, they're very helpful. They can be able to answer any of your questions, be able to provide some assistance. We also have part of our community development block grant funds. We've had this for quite a few years now, that we will assist startup businesses. It does have to be able to provide X amount of jobs, and it has to be able to serve somebody that was originally low income. But we do have those up to $10,000 for a grant assistance, and I would welcome you to check that out. You would have to be an Albany resident and an Albany business for that. But it is very important with RAIN. I had, as I stated, been on the council for a long time, and that was even before RAIN started up. And so I have been on the council ever since the beginning of RAIN, and I have been so impressed with the leadership of RAIN, how innovative they've been working with entrepreneurs and the successes they've had. I think you will be very beneficial to be able to follow through with their program and their leadership, and they can provide some great resources for you. I don't know if anybody saw 60 Minutes yesterday, but it did kind of stick in my mind. It was the General Motors CEO, and she had mentioned about how the normal that we have today will be the new abnormal. So what we have for businesses, I think what we had currently, not everyone's going to survive, but we're going to be seeing a different way of being able to have a model for business. And that's where it's kind of a unique time for someone to want to start up a business now, is because we're going to be having a different model for some businesses. Some will survive, some won't. But this is an opportune time for you to be able to launch your ideas and be able to fill that new abnormal future that it looks like we're going to be seeing. So with that, I think I just want to really appreciate that you're being involved with this RAIN project, and I think you will really be pleased that you have connected with the RAIN staff members. So with that, okay,
well, thank
you,
you, Mayor. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule. And you said in the beginning that you're used to speaking to large groups in person. Well, when we first started, we had 6 on. We're up to 45 people now. So you are still addressing a pretty fairly large group. So thank you again for
yes.
entrepreneurs. We appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you, Caroline.
Take care.
So, thank you.
Great. Okay, and so my entire team from Oregon Rain, we've got some awesome folks on the call today. All of us are entrepreneurs running our own businesses as well. So please, if you want to reach out to any of us, if you have any specific questions, we will also be monitoring the chat as you have questions for Robert and Julie and Milena from Cascade Seed Fund. And most of the content, or most of the workshops that we're delivering, we're now adding these disclaimers because it's really important. And I do need to take a minute and read this quickly. We're not financial advisors. We are not providing tax, legal, or accounting advice. The material has been prepared for informational purposes only, is not intended to provide, and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting, investment, or business advice. You should consult your own tax, legal, financial, and professional advisors before engaging in any transactions. I feel like I'm on the radio when they do that really fast, sort of thing. So just want to remind everybody of that. It's really important. And here we are. We have these wonderful folks joining us today from the Cascade Seed Fund. So as I say your name, if you could just do a quick wave, and then we will also turn it over to you guys. So we've got Milena Johnson, who's an analyst with the Cascade Seed Fund. So if Milena, if you could do a quick wave so folks know who you are. We also have Robert Pease, the Managing Director of Cascade Seed Fund.
Oh, I got spotlighted. That's a clever thing.
Yeah, we're spotlighting, so that way, because it's hard with almost 50 videos, we have to point out who it is. And then Julie Harrelson, Managing Director as well. And I've had the pleasure of knowing these guys for a while, but I've known Julie the longest. And Julie always has her heart in the right place when it comes to helping entrepreneurs, and has assembled an incredible team with Robert as her partner and Milena. And we're really fortunate to have them as a programmatic partner in developing a seed fund. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see your wonderful faces.
Great. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Mayor and Rain team. Really appreciate being able to be here today. And hello, everybody. I see some familiar faces and some folks that we haven't met. But Robert and I conceived of this as sort of a bit of a fireside chat today in terms of really being informal. And I thought I might just say a few words at the beginning here to frame it up. We have a portfolio of over 30 startup companies, and those companies typically come to us after they've run through friends and family money and have established a presence and some momentum. And we're often the first institutional funding that is invested in the company. I think it's important to note that we have an array of entrepreneurs on the line. So some of you are what we call lifestyle entrepreneurs, where you have a company and you do it along with a lot of other things. You are self-funding it, you're bootstrapping it. And then some of you are what we call small business entrepreneurs, where you have a small business, you hope to make a great living for your family and live where you live, be engaged in the community. And then some of you are the crazy entrepreneurs who want to raise money and be the next Google. And so there's this spectrum of folks. And if you're on the phone, you're likely somewhere in that spectrum. And where we invest is in those companies that are really looking to grow and scale. So some of the questions that you have, we will refer you to other resources. But we first wanted to start out really talking about what it takes to lead in this kind of environment, and then talk about some tactical things that we've seen some of our portfolio companies do, and some of the things that we've done as entrepreneurs ourselves. Robert?
No, that's a wonderful preamble. Just to reinforce, thanks for everyone for making the time. I know we're all sort of stuck at home, so we kind of have time, but appreciate everybody carving out some time to do this. And as Julie said, our goal here is to be responsive to questions. I think that in times like this, kind of regardless of the phases that we invest in, there's some business fundamentals that sort of come to the forefront. We certainly have a lens on that through the companies that we have invested in, or that we are still talking about making investments. So that's one of the questions, right? Is yes, we actually still are seeking to make investments. I think the macro environment certainly influences that a little bit. but I think that, as Julie and I were talking a little bit about how we wanted to kind of maybe frame this conversation, or at least hopefully get it started, was that kind of on two levels, right? One, which is a little higher, and it's great that Rod is talking about this, in the next one of these events, is just around leadership. So if you run a business, or if you're the president of your business, or you have employees, really friggin' scary time for everybody, including yourself, right? If we all think back to 6 weeks ago, where this all began to unfold, having put yourself in a position to lead people and lead a company puts a lot of additional pressure on you in terms of managing, or in addition to managing your own emotions as it goes through this thing. And so that is something to not understate. I'm assuming that those folks on the line, everybody here has had a little bit of that, if not a lot of that, over the last several weeks. And there's a real drain that can come around that. So important to surround yourself with helpful people, let's say, or people that you can trust, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur. A lot of times you're your own motivation, your own accountability. So I think that's an important piece about that. And then I'll pause, because Julie, I know you and I talked a little about this prior, so beyond yourself and your own sort of self mental health and preservation, which we think is an important thing, this is a time for sort of transparency as best you can provide it with employees, even in unknowns. And someone very wise said to me a long time ago, and I don't remember who, so apologies, but there's a time when you got to stop working on PowerPoint and start working in Excel, right? Because Excel will tell you the truth on the whole, right? You have variables, you have different types of things, and where Excel takes you, or a spreadsheet of your choice, Google Sheets, whatever you might want to use, is around what happens at this moment in time, which is basically, it's all about runway. This is the first thing we did as we got into this with our portfolio companies, is you go and you check off with folks in terms of what's their cash balance, how much time do they have to sort of try to figure out what's going to happen here, or trajectories up or down. So because we're this far into this, I'm assuming everyone's well aware of their cash balances. But what happens in that is not only how much you had to start with, it's the potential churn or slow pay that may happen from customers is also a part of it as well. So as a jumping off point, right, I thought that this was a good sort of thing to think about, which is, if you don't manage your business through Excel, now's the time to kind of understand. And because there's so many unknowns, you kind of have to model, right? You have to sort of say everything's going to stay the same, right? Or things are going to decline by 20%, decline by 40%, decline by 50%, right? Or my growth is not going to happen in Q4, it's going to happen in Q3 of next year. And then what do those scenarios look like, so you have a little more agility in your thinking?
Yes.
Robert, I don't know if you guys saw the poll we did, just to get a handle of who's on. 57% of those on the session are entrepreneurs looking to raise capital, so the majority, and 30% have previously raised from a seed fund.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So thank you. So just to kind of emphasize and expand on what Robert said, I thought, Mayor Canopa, your comments about 60 Minutes last night, so I watched that segment, and one of the things that struck me was, for both Ford and GM, things are in a really difficult situation, like at the 20th power to what a lot of our small businesses in Oregon are experiencing. But one of the things that they've been doing is pivoting, so they're innovating. Ford is building ventilators, and both companies are making personal protective equipment, masks, and so on. And I think that while money is tight and there is uncertainty, it's also true that in times of constraint like this, there's a lot of innovation that can happen. And one of the things that we see in the companies that we're investing in is very close attention to cash management, right? So how long can you last in a worst case scenario, but also looking to see what this environment might need. So we have a company that does green detergent, and they have had a lot of interest in their product. We've had other companies that have found that their revenues have dropped significantly. They had huge momentum, and then boom, one day this, next day this kind of thing. So the question that Robert goes to is, in some ways you have to go to the basics and the fundamentals around managing the business and managing cash. And I was just recalling when Robert was talking that when I owned my first business, I had to really learn how to manage the cash. And so I had a spreadsheet that showed the expenses and when they were due and the money and when it was coming in on a weekly basis. And it was magical. I mean, this is like 100 years ago now, but it was magical that if I moved certain things, like if I could bring the money in a little sooner or spend a little less, I could turn the numbers from red to black, right? So in some ways, it does boil down to this. It's like, try and spend less and sell more in terms of having your business have keep some momentum in place. And money's going to be tight, right? So I don't know if there are specific questions about raising funds that you have right now, but I did also want to underscore a point that Robert made about getting trustworthy advisors around you if you're an independent entrepreneur or a new entrepreneur. Sort of this concept of the kitchen cabinet, where you have a few people that you can go to. It might consist of somebody who loves you no matter what because you need help. You need mental health support. It might consist of financial advisors and legal advisors, or people that have done this before, who have been entrepreneurs before, who can say, oh yeah, I've been through these circumstances before, and let me give you my perspective on some of the things that we did to help survive this downturn.
Yeah, all good points. And as Julie and I were actually on a call earlier today, and working with a company that we're assessing, I guess, for investment. And this is back to kind of the what's good, regardless of, I think, the buckets that Julie laid out of what kind of business you run. But I'll put this through the lens of fundraising, because there's some questions on that, which is, there's no shortage of things you put together. There's your pro forma, right? And you get your hockey stick and you do whatever. But what has become very important for us, and I think is always important broadly, but especially in this day and age, because we just don't have good visibility to what happens Q2, Q3, Q4, right? Is the cash plan. And it's a burn down plan, right? That's the way I kind of phrase those things, which is there's N amount of dollars today, right? And there's N amount of expenses that are going to hit. And then there's assumptions around revenue. And so that's back again, right? You spend time on a spreadsheet and be like, well, if I just sustain my current customer base and don't sell anything more, what does that look like, right? If I lose 20% of my customers, like, what does that look like? Because cash is the bridge here. We again are not fortune tellers or future tellers or anything like that. But the way that we've kind of come to this is, Q2, which we're essentially a month through at this stage, so that's April, May, June, is about survival, right? Regardless of your business, right? And this is the wind being taken out of the sails of restaurants and places of gathering and places like that. But also, if you sell to certain segments that are within physical retail, right, or anything related to kind of consumer discretionary, and then there's this sort of the reverb off of that, which is what are the impacts in other industries beyond that. But if you think about that, which is, look, my goal is to get through the second quarter and be in business. It takes a lot of hard questions, right, for yourself, for your business, around headcount, which is going to be your highest percentage of your burn. You've got rent, you've got a lot of these other things that kind of factor into it. But I think you've got to think about Q2 as that. Clearly, I hope, right, there's some additional clarity as we get further into time here, that Q3 and Q4 become a little more around sustainability, because we don't know what the new normal is. We don't know what goes back. We don't know what changes. But in sustainability, there's also opportunity, right? If you think about your business and the need that you've been solving, right, maybe open dialogue with your customers about problems they think they're going to have, right? The new reality. If if we can't physically get together again, like, what happens in different types of businesses? And so, if you've been an early stage entrepreneur and you did a lot of early customer interviews and things like that, revisiting that, I think, may be important. Even if there's not clarity, it may be able to give you some signal on how you may have to evolve your business in terms of the needs that you're solving for customers. So again, to me, it's about survival through Q2, right? Cash being a huge, component of that. the sustainability through Q3 and Q4 and plan for a return to growth mindset, if you will, right, in the first couple quarters of next year. And that may change tomorrow based on new information, but that's kind of where we have gotten to, because at least you can do something about that, right? Instead of these things all coming at you. This is back to kind of leadership. There's things you can control and there's things you can't control. The things you can't control, if you over-index on them, will drive you crazy, right? So focus on the things that you can control the best you can and continue to use new information as it comes to the table.
And the thing
Robert,
that, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, you go ahead, Julie, and then there's a couple questions coming in.
Yeah, I can see some of the questions. There's some specific questions about fundraising here, which we can speak to. But I think that's a really important point that Robert is making, and something that we've talked about quite a lot is, people tend to try and migrate towards certainty. But the world is really an uncertain place, and this kind of event emphasizes that. So really being a successful entrepreneur has to do with so much with how you respond to that. And it turns out that in terms of a business, there's only a certain number of, like a finite number of knobs and dials that you can turn to get the right mix. We call it like throwing levers, or we talk about it as like there's a soundboard and you're trying to get the right mix. So your lease costs, your personnel costs, your how you have your contract structured. These are all things that you can do in a different way to allow you to basically migrate through the cycle that Robert is talking about. And again, we don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know, but that this framework that we've been using is useful for planning. And then if it looks like that time is going to extend, we'll just extend those periods of time. So what we're looking at as a fund, we have funds to invest. We are investing. We're taking a very deliberate pace. And we have a specific criterion. So we're industry agnostic. The company has to have revenue and a team and some early product market fit and some momentum. Momentum is an interesting question right now because things are slowed down quite a bit. But there's a question that says, how has Cascade changed your outlook on companies to consider investing in? Are you looking for the scrappy factor that indicates how creative the company is in weathering the storm? I would say we always look for that. And what we're seeing, and we are both reading and studying and talking to our peers here, locally and across the country, is valuations are coming down. So what your business is worth is softening a bit, and we see a lot of the larger VCs having starting to look at more VC friendly terms. We're just kind of moving forward with this deliberate pace to continue to evaluate companies that fit our criterion to see if it looks like they're investable companies. Robert? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, and several folks on the line here that have heard this before from me, because trying to demystify and boil down what does Cascade look for when we invest. And so there's some constraints we put on this, right? So we are Oregon first, Pacific Northwest interested. So we have a regional constraint, right? We invest in technology and consumer products. So we have sector constraints. There is, again, as folks on the line have been through this with me, there is then this question of the investment case on the business. And so it's never, when you talk to any investor, it's not about whether or not there's judgment on whether you have a business or not. I'm a broken record on this, right? But if you can sell it for more than it costs you to make it, right, you have profit and you have a business. So it's never about that. It's about the investment case on that business, which means if you're going to take money from an external person, right? So just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you have to raise money. When you take money from somebody else, there's an expectation of when that money comes back and different levels of expectation on that money. An individual angel investor has a different mindset and expectation and accountability to just themselves versus a fund, which is what we are. We have a slightly higher expectation of return, and a more traditional, larger venture capital firm is going to have an even larger expectation of return. So I think that that's an important thing to parse regardless of what's going on kind of out in the world, right? So many things the same in terms of how we look at things. And then 3 key questions that we continue to ask and want to get clarity around before we would look at a company for our fund and our investment thesis, which is, can you build the thing you think you can build? Which is it beyond, PowerPoint and spec and design and aspiration? It actually, something exists. The second is, does anybody care? Which is beyond your friends and your family and the people that don't want to hurt your feelings. Have real customers, real users gone through pilots or trials or usage, some kind of data you can put your hands around to say, I built this, someone logged in to try it, and they came back 16 times over the next 2 months, right? There's signal in that. And then the third hurdle that we wanted, the third bucket, if you will, right, is, does anybody care enough to pay? And that's not because we're not an early stage investor. We absolutely are, but we are not a pre-revenue investor. Because if your whole spreadsheet, remember, go back to your spreadsheet, assumes these many customers are going to pay you this much money over this amount of time, the more you can go and sort that, right, or figure out if that's the case. Odds are you're priced too low. Most entrepreneurs, when they start their businesses, they go out, they don't charge enough, right? But you'll learn in terms of how you sell. You'll learn what matters to your customer, especially if you have a model that says, I get a transaction fee based on some activity. Going through that motion further validates your business, right? And then it allows an investor like ourselves, or even larger funds, to sort of begin to put their hands around it to say, oh, I see. Okay, so not only is there a thing and a problem, it's a problem people are willing to pay for. So then I can begin to extrapolate this thing out. So very long, drawn out. I guess there's lots of questions about what do we look for and how do we do it. Like, that is the same. That's what we were doing in January, and that's what we're doing today. The difference is, like, if there's a heavy dependency on physical retail, right, that has to be parsed. If there's a heavy dependency on people going back to bars and restaurants, right, that's hard to know right now. And so what happens is, in those conversations, even if those buckets can be, or those boxes can be checked, that's going to say, you know what, we should probably revisit Q3, right? Because we just don't know enough right now for our investment case, right, to lean into something like that. So that's what's going to be maddening about this, is if you're raising money, is that, you still may be in process and you're still going to be reviewed and evaluated, but you got to be aware of kind of the macro here, and try to figure out if it's better use of your time to just put it on ice, right, for 30 or 60 days when there's a little more clarity, and try it again, because you certainly have plenty of things to do. Or if there's a new wrinkle to this. I mean, we've got several companies that we've invested in the past that are benefiting because they're cloud-based software, which means anybody anywhere can access a piece of software. Well, bang, all of a sudden everybody's remote. And so if you're still in an industry where it's physical software on a server in a box that everybody has to access, right, cloud-based software now has an opportunity because it's an access anywhere model. It's what Zoom is. We're able to come together because of this. There are lots of different things that existed before Zoom, right? GoToMeeting and WebEx and all those different types of things. Zoom's got an interesting angle, right? Because there's no heavy download. It's a share a link, everybody can get online together. Certainly has become more intense, right, in terms of our usage profiles now. But this is still not ideal, right? We got a bunch of boxes. You highlight me when I'm running my mouth. Got questions kind of coming on over here. So I think that, within this weirdness, right, there is opportunity. And I'd be quiet because I do talk a lot. We may see this massive catalytic transformation of work, of digital sort of embracing in a lot of industries that were sort of tinkering along. Now they don't have a choice. So what kind of opportunities does that create?
So yeah, it's a great point, Robert, or it's many great points.
I need a timer. That's what I need. I'm like, oh my God, I've been talking for 10 minutes.
Seeing a lot is direct to consumers. Somebody asked the question, are there certain industries we wouldn't invest in? I think it's Jim McCrate. Hi, Jim. About, are there certain industries that we wouldn't invest in? And the answer to that is we are quite open, but there are industries that we haven't ever invested in that we wouldn't invest in. For example, restaurant business, very unlikely unless there was some tech-enabled consumer product that was being sold alongside of it. There's a question about how much of the portfolio, how much of our investment funds will we put back into the existing portfolio versus new companies. Well, we're in a new fund right now, so we're building a new portfolio of somewhere in the range of 15 companies right now. So we've got an investment period of 2 to 3 years. So we're going to be actively looking for opportunities. There may be some of the existing portfolio companies that come from our previous funds that come forward to this fund, but they'll have to go through the due diligence process just like any new company would need to. How are we doing on the questions, Caroline?
Good. There's a bunch flowing in. One that I think is super interesting is they're wondering, are you guys talking about using the funds that you have now to do more follow-on of your existing companies or make new investments? What's that percentage looking like for you guys?
Well, I just mentioned that in the new fund, we have funds to invest in new companies. The previous funds, all the capital has been deployed. So there may be some companies that come forward to us from the previous investments that we've made that are seeking funding, but they would need to go through the process with this new fund, just like any other new company. And, we're looking at, this portfolio will probably be around 15 investments, and we've made 4. So we have money to invest in new companies.
Great. And then this is a question, I know this company's out in John Day, and there's no natural food stores out there. And I know you guys, this wouldn't be an investment area for you, but curious about what you're thinking here is, she's got an investor locally who's willing to help her open up a natural food store, and that is considered essential right now. Do you have any advice for her what she should consider as she's opening up a brick and mortar in downtown John Day, which is a lot of people are wanting her to open right now?
Yeah, I love John Day. So what I would do on that is really look to local resources. So in terms of economic development resources, I would look at Business Oregon, which is the state economic development agency. I would talk to, there are CDFI organizations that do rural loans. Craft 3 is one of those. And see, I think it's likely going to take people that understand the local environment and understand that there may be a food desert there in a certain way. So, but it would be unlikely that a venture fund would invest in a business like that.
Yeah, no, I'll get sort of wicked tactical on that. I agree with what Julie said, but like, okay, so a natural food store in John Day, and so you're sort of retail constrained currently, but I would find out everybody that's in that region that wants your product, build your email list, build a phone list, right? I mean, find out who they are by name, right? That you can do that right now. And then, what do people need right now, right? Stuff that comes to your house is certainly treasured a little more than stuff I got to go get myself. So if all of a sudden you begin to get people on a delivery request, and then why not just go ahead and get them to sign up for once a month? Hey, how about once a week? And then begin to bill that way, right? And so you get some predictability because you essentially have subscribers. And again, I don't know what the overall market size or number of potential customers in John Day would be for this type of thing. Maybe some people want something weekly, maybe some people want something monthly, quarterly, but those are all things that you can begin to do because the customer is the one that's going to pull through on the revenue. So the more you can do to begin to engage those customers now, I think is the right thing to do. There was an interesting image I saw of some sort of market in New York or one of the more larger urban centers where they had taken a picture of everything that they had in their store, and they had these mounted on poster boards outside. So you could see what they had in the store before, or maybe not even going into the store. I think that was the premise. You could say, oh, I need 3 of those. So it wasn't any kind of fancy inventory online ordering system because this was a physical business that people came to shop at. and sort of take that friction out of it, which was only N number of people can go in the store at a time, or maybe people weren't comfortable going in the store. They just literally took a bunch of pictures and put it on poster boards outside. So I think there's a lot of that micro innovation, which is super possible, right? So again, back to the John Day example, which is, I think there's a lot you can start doing right now, right? Go build that list, go find out who all those people are and see if they'll start paying you now to be their, super knowledgeable, natural foods concierge almost, right?
Well, yeah, and I had some friends that built a natural foods grocery store in Helena, Montana, doing that very thing. It's now been in business about 20, 30 years, I think, but it was a very localized grassroots effort, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, anytime anybody brings up an idea, we always have a zillion ideas of how you could do it, but
that's right. It's always easier to say it than it is to do it. So
my advice, I'm not
we
using
have self-awareness.
right. So
here's a good question for you guys. What kind of return are you looking for from a business, and how long are you looking to get that payback?
Yes, a good question. This goes back to kind of different types of investors are going to have different return expectations. And so we are a pooled capital fund, which means we go and we raise money from investors. And we also have a defined timeline in terms of we put a fund together, its life is 10 years, as these traditionally are. So when people look at you, any fund, right, they're going to say, okay, is this something that within sort of a 5 to 8 year time horizon, I think I can realistically find a scenario that says someone will buy this, which is your most likely scenario, for 4 to 7x the invested price. I think that's a good place to start. And that's the investment case, right? It's not about your business. It's not about that you can, sell it for more than it costs you to make it. It's like, is there a scenario where I can attract outside capital? I can grow this within a defined timeline, which means it's going to be on an accelerated pace. And there's a plausible exit scenario. And so plausible exit scenarios are driven by an active landscape of potential buyers. And so if you're in an industry and there's only one giant that buys everybody, that's not to say there's not a potential acquirer, but it's binary. It's either them or nobody. So the more when you raise money, you can say, let me just paint the picture here, right? I could be appealing to this type of company, this type of company, this type of company. Here's this pattern of acquisitions that they've made because they actually embrace innovation, right? And like to bring in smaller companies or companies that have been able to do that outside their four walls. So again, long answer within that, but that's the cost in addition to your ownership. When you take money from a fund or from an investor is the sort of accelerated timeline that it's going to put you on in terms of expectations, and also the return expectations on the dollar. It's not just trying to beat, the S&P 500, right? It's not just trying to generate a 6% annual return of some kind. It's designed to be a much more significant return profile.
And remember, it's gotten very, very popular and kind of cool to raise money, but raising money for your company and bringing on a business partner is a very challenging thing to do. And someone came to me a number of months ago and was describing a business and said, and I really want to get VC money. And I was like, don't do it, and which is a strange thing to say from a fund manager. But my point being, and I was, joking to some extent, but my point being that, once you take on a business partner, it's really more difficult to get out of than it is to get out of a marriage. I mean, you're business partners for the life of the business until you figure something out. And there are lots of other ways to build businesses. I just was talking to a guy recently who has a $20 million business. He started it in his garage. He didn't know about venture funding. And so he, gathered up a little bit of money early on and went forward and built the business that way. And then when it got large enough, he raised money. But it's an important thing to understand and to vet the companies that might be investing in you, to vet the funds as much as they do you. So we always make sure when companies come to us that if they want to get serious about having us invest and we're serious, that they talk to other entrepreneurs that we've invested in so they know what it's like to work with us.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Nate is asking if you have a geography requirement. Does the business have to be headquartered in Oregon, firstly? And then second, could Milena post a link to apply for your fund? Sarah's asking for how to apply to your fund. So first question, geography.
You don't have to be in Oregon. We're Oregon first and Pacific Northwest interested. So
Yes.
it would be like, we can invest, for example, from a company in Maine, but it would be very unlikely because our fund is small. We have a $6 million fund. And we are geographically focused because part of what we're interested in is we want to make a return for our investors, but we also are interested in making a contribution to Oregon and the Pacific Northwest economic resilience.
Yeah, we do have flexibility. We have the getting back to constraints, right? So we're going to look at this in terms of the regional lens with a bias towards Oregon, but you don't, like, if you have an executive or group of executives or core part of the team that actually works in Oregon, like, that means more to us than if it's just a company that happens to be based in Florida that's interesting, right? That doesn't make the filter. There has to be a tie back of some kind to the region. And in terms of how to get in touch with us, so what we have done and will continue to do, probably in the next 30 days or so, we can certainly let the RAIN folks know when that happens. We run open application periods, and so we do that via GUST. If you go to cascadeseedfund.com, you'll see there's a link there to something called GUST. It's currently not active because it's not taking applications. So what we try to do is run defined time periods, which is, you don't have to know me or Julie or Melena. You don't have to get a warm introduction from anybody that knows us. We publish our criteria, of which I've just said several times on this in this session. And if you meet those criteria, we're going to have a conversation, right? We try to have a sort of a phone-based conversation with everybody that applies and that meets those criteria. Mostly because that's where a lot of interestingness happens, and there's so much friction in fundraising. It was so hard when I was doing it. I didn't know how to get to the right people. I think entrepreneurs have a hell of a lot more stuff to do with their time than try to figure out how to get someone that knows me. So we try to take the friction out of this and say, we're looking at companies now through this stage. Everybody gets a conversation that matches a certain set of criteria. And then if that goes well, we run a very process-oriented approach, which is we then do a more formal presentation. And then that goes well, then we enter a phase of due diligence that'll run 30 to 60 days. If that goes well, part of that process is actually a presentation to our investment committee, which is made up of investors in the fund. So once you get on rails with us, it's pretty fast, relatively. I mean, there's the lore of the fund that sits down and meets you in 6 seconds and writes you a $500,000 check. Well, A, that doesn't exist. B, it certainly doesn't exist in our region. Individuals may be able to make a little bit faster investment decision because it's just their money. But again, since we raise money from other people, we have a responsibility and have to have process to run through that. So, we think 30 to 60 days is pretty tight. And is kind of how our process runs. And the other part of this is we try to be very explicit about where the gates are and where our sort of interest or concern is. And if it's going to be a no, we do our best to get to that as fast as possible as well. Because we think that also, back to having lots of other things to do as an entrepreneur, is that you kind of need to know where you stand. Because when I was raising money on the operating side of it, everyone's super nice to me. Wow, everybody was nice. That was a great meeting. Everybody was nice, right? Right? It's like, where am I? Well, in this day and age, it's, are you actually investing? Do you plan to make any new investments through the end of the year? I think it's an operative question you should ask any fund. And then, then understand a little bit around process and criteria. If it's like, well, we have some conversations and then we're going to do this, you owe it to yourself to sort of be able to dial that in a little bit in terms of a timeline so that you don't, unrealistically forecast capital that you think you're going to get, and kind of know whether or not you're actually truly on kind of the trajectory to secure financing.
Robert and Julie, here's another good question, because Julie, earlier you mentioned that you were only investing in post-revenue companies, but what about an R&D company that might likely never hit revenue and they might get acquired before that? Do you guys look at companies like that are heavy on R&D?
We have looked. It would be very unusual. We did invest in a company, I think in 2015 or 16, that had very little revenue, but they showed a path to some quick growth. So it would be very unusual. Robert, do you want to expand on that?
No, I think that kind of embedded within that question is, if it's an R&D company, so think about like a pharmaceutical development company, right? That requires significant investment, significant time, FDA regulatory approval hurdles. That's not our business, right? We're not big enough fund to handle it. We don't have, if your capital needs on your business to get to the R&D phase are $100 million, our target check size out of this fund is $250,000. We're just not that source of capital. So depending on the capital requirements of the business, like that then defines who you need to go talk to about it. But generally, we want a little bit of sort of market signal that something is in the right space. And the other is there's a lot of really cool things that people build that we just don't understand. Right. And so, we're pretty heavy in software. We're pretty heavy in direct to consumer products, done a little bit of hybrid into some hardware related things. With deep material science, right? Deep science, those types of things. We do our best to take a hard look, and we've got a pool of experts that we can kind of bring around, but sometimes, it's just a little bit beyond our scope.
Nate is asking about company structure. Do you require conversion to C Corp, or will you invest in LLCs, and how about B Corps?
If you're going to raise money, you need to be a C Corp, which means if you're going to raise money and sell preferred equity in your business, because any investor is going to want preferred shares, you need to be a C Corp. You can raise money as an LLC.
On a note,
it'll be a convertible note or a SAFE, right? But you'll be converting to a C Corp when that note converts. It's just and this is sort of beyond us kind of being curmudgeon-y, right? It's like, because we're sort of an institutional fund, even though we're not giant, we have a lot of the same concerns. And so if you're like, hey, I'm going to raise a $500,000 seed round, and then I'm going to go out and raise a $2 to $4 million Series A round, like this has to be resolved now, because you're never going to get to that A round. Like we could maybe get through it with you, but you're going to have to fix it eventually. And the longer operating history you have as a company, the more complex that becomes, especially if you get an LLC with lots of different members and you've done some profit sharing of some kind like that. It just takes cycles, right? It can all be papered correctly. And so the price difference between setting up as an LLC, pretty easy, go to Secretary of State, get an LLC, got an EIN, I'm good to go, versus something more structured around a C Corp. There is a little more investment there. But again, if you're going to seek outside capital, you need to be a C Corp, is my opinion.
Yeah. Will has a couple good questions here, and I think one of them you might have answered already, but at the end of the session here, it might be good to repeat this one, is when's your next open application period? When does it close? And what's your average deal size going to be under that current fund?
So we are still sorting the date of our next application period. We opened one, we did our first one in November of last year, because unfortunately what happens, if anybody's tried to raise money over November, December, you'll realize that no one is really available. So we wanted to be available. So we had a first application period, kind of ran from November through January, got a bunch of applicants, working through all those, sort of working through a lot of other things. We're probably going to open another application period here. I would call it June-ish, as we get a little more clarity on kind of where things stand in the macro environment, and begin to get some visibility into Q3. We think that'll be a good time to do it. I mean, companies are, one, trying to manage cash. Two, they're trying to figure out what the Paycheck Protection Program is. Is it relevant to them? Like all these other sort of pieces have kind of come together. So that's kind of our timing. But what's good, we drop a press release when we do that, and we let all our community allies know as well. Check size out of this fund for initial investment is $250,000. So that's kind of the hurdle. We do not make exceptions on that, because we think that's one, it's how the portfolio is being constructed, and the other is, if it can't justify that check, then we shouldn't be doing it. The question on lead versus follow, we will lead. We do lead. That's all going to be relative to the round size. Generally, what you want is your lead investor to be half the round, or sometimes even like 25% of it. But it's tough to lead if you're only like 10% of the overall. If you're raising $1 million and you have somebody leading for $100,000, that can be sometimes problematic, because somebody's going to come in with a $400,000 check, but there's a $100,000 lead. Who gets to set the terms, right? So you can get into a lot of unnecessary cycles when you've got a low dollar amount leading around. So I think that there's a lot within that one. I think that, oh, and then there's a one around barriers here.
So there's a detailed question, and I think that that would be something that we could take offline. But I think anybody that's in what you would call the chicken and egg phase, like you need money to make money, but when you make money, you won't need money. I think that that is the entrepreneur's dilemma, one of the many. I know we only have 5 minutes left. Caroline, do you want us to take that question, or do you want to?
Yeah, you can go ahead and take that question, because I only need about 30 seconds to wrap things up. So go for it.
Well, I think it would take further conversation to answer that in detail.
Okay. What about the
Robert may have something he'd like to say.
No, I don't. Just if my email address is not available, then you can drop it into the chat, or I can drop it into the chat, whatever's easiest. And we can
Great.
take a look at that.
We'll share that as well. Thank you guys so much.
For your question, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any final words of wisdom that you want to share with entrepreneurs before we sign off.
So that would mean that some wisdom has been shared here. So hopefully this has been a good use of everybody's time.
We'll say
I would
wisdom
say,
with
this is really hard. It's hard under normal circumstances. It's really hard to be an entrepreneur. But in my mind, this is where innovation comes from. This is where really good things come from. So I appreciate everybody's effort and hard work. And thanks for spending an hour with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. And before we sign off, I just quickly wanted to share the 2 upcoming sessions that we have on Monday. I mentioned earlier, we've got Dr. Rod Ray, who is the former CEO of Bend Research, who's going to be talking about how to maintain leadership in a time of crisis. He's been, he's known for traveling around and speaking to lots of large Fortune 500 companies about leadership. So we're lucky to have him. He's also an entrepreneur in residence for us out in Grant County. There was Stephanie. And then lastly, again, I know there were, I think, 1 or 2 food entrepreneurs on. If you're a food manufacturer or beverage manufacturer, you're not going to want to miss our May 11th, 2 o'clock session with the founder of Tofurkey, talking about how they're weathering the storm right now and what they're doing. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you all for spending time with us. Thank you, Julie, Robert, and Elena. Really appreciate everything that you've provided for us today. And then, of course, the Mayor of Albany, Mayor Canopa. It's always wonderful seeing you. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a great week. We look forward to interacting with you. And hopefully Friday you'll join us when we have Caroline Fisher, Dr. Fisher, who's on as well. She's a psychiatrist. She's going to be talking about how startups, we're already really intense people, right? So how we can manage our mental health. So join us Friday, 9 a.m. for that. We've got your emails. We'll make sure you get invited. So thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Bye.
See you guys.